a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman the Geek, presented by Black Stack Brewing, family owned and operated, and now in a liquor store near you. I'm John Bonus of Twins Daily. With me, cheery, happy Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
Would you say I'm happy-go-lucky?
Happy-go-lucky, giddy, maybe.
Yeah. I don't know what happy-go-lucky means, but I always thought that was a weird phrase. Yeah, this team we've devoted our lives to, John. It's a tough one.
This is we've been through some tough stretches. Like we've been through some, 2019 when they lost that lead versus Cleveland. They had like 11-game lead or something over 2 months. They managed to blow it. We've been through the 2020 where they managed to kind of fall apart, although they rallied in the last week.
I was going to say
2020.
1992 through 2024. Tough stretch.
I was going to say, yeah. I mean, when we started the podcast in 2011, I'm starting to wonder if maybe this stretch is due to us not doing free podcasts because I was traveling so much. So maybe this is what turns it around. I know my little 3-mile runs have not turned it around.
Well,
tried that.
I can't be blamed for you traveling, John. So the blame goes
true.
to the poll ads and to you.
I guess so.
I would say top level blame. Then
I'm willing to lean into it. No problem. No doubt.
You don't just so you're clear. You don't just because you're equal in blame. You don't get the billions. Like that isn't. No, it doesn't get distributed. You're still.
As far as I know, I have yet to receive a check.
No, you've already spent your billions going to Brazil and now lovely Philadelphia.
Harrisburg,
not even Philadelphia.
Not even Philly. I go to Philadelphia Airport. That's as much as I get to see. Philadelphia and then blue route traffic. That's it.
It's exciting, John. Still beats watching the Twins play the Guardians. So
you are correct.
lost 3 out of 4 in Cleveland. It was a familiar story where every game was winnable.
Yeah.
And I say that
a lot of coin flip games just kept coming up tails.
Twins are just really bad at coin flips, it turns out, or they're using a screwed up coin or something. I don't know.
It does feel when you get into these close games that Cleveland is so excited to play a close game, and the Twins are like,
yes. Well, I mean, just look at the bullpens. I mean, Cleveland has,
right.
First of all, for the past decade, but specifically this year, like a phenomenal bullpen, and not just like, oh, they're one of the better bullpens in the league. Like a historically good bullpen this year. Obviously, it starts or ends, I guess, more realistically with Class A.
Yeah, right.
But even beyond that, like you look at the guys that they're leaning on three times each, let's say in this series, and it's Class A, Hunter Gaddis, Smith, who's a rookie, and then Herron, who's just a lefty that they kind of turned into something, and all 4 of those guys have a sub-2 ERA and at least 70 appearances.
That's nuts.
How can you? That's a dominant bullpen. I mean, Class A is the best closer there is, obviously. Yep. And so it really, the Twins are just not as good as Cleveland. I mean, that's not breaking news or anything. This season has proven it basically from start to finish.
You're right.
They dominated the Twins, and I don't mean dominated in the sense they're blowing them out, but they just won a lot of games against the Twins in April, and they won a lot of games against the Twins in September, and they won more games than the Twins against other teams too, other than the White Sox, which is always going to be strange when we look back at the season. However, the biggest part of this has got to be the bullpens, and as you watch Cleveland's bullpen make it through the entire season, leaning heavily not just on Class A, who's going to end up throwing 75 games or something like that, but on Class A and 3 different dominant setup men, where they're all essentially pitching like 50% of the games almost, and they all have almost flawless performances over the course of the season. And then you look over at the other team, and the Twins have right now about 2.5 relievers they trust, and they can't seem to consistently make it through series using those guys in a way that all of the key spots go to them.
Yep.
And some of that is unavoidable. Some of that also is they just don't use their relievers the same way that Cleveland uses their relievers. Cleveland is much more willing, especially with Class A. I mean, Class A just pitches every time they have a lead or every time it's tied. And
Yeah.
he ends up with, I think, 4 straight years or 4 of the last 5 years, obviously not 2020 because it was a short season, but he ends up making 75 appearances. I did notice if you look at like his game log, and we've seen this when he faces the Twins, he like never pitches more than 1 inning, but he's always available for 1 inning, essentially.
Hmm.
And it's not that, Griffin Jax pretty much always pitches 1 inning too, and Griffin Jax is going to end up with probably right around 70 appearances for the
You're
season
right.
too.
Yeah, he's the one that would fall into that
Right.
same level that they were kind of talking about here.
But the Twins, with someone like Duran or especially Cole Sands, who's emerged as kind of one of these Cleveland caliber relievers, I would say this year. I mean, Cole Sands has been excellent all
Yep.
season, but they've needed more from their guys. 2 innings, 1 2/3, come in when the bases are loaded. Where Cleveland is basically just 1 inning, and you're
Well,
going to
because
be
they've got
available
more of
tomorrow.
them. They've
Right.
got more of them. That's why. I mean, that's the luxury or the
Yes.
difference between having five of those guys versus or four or five of those guys versus two and a half of those guys.
Yes. And we see now anytime the Twins play, 3 close games in 4 days, or in this case, 4 close games in 4 days.
Right.
By the time they get to the third game or the fourth game, they're like, well, we already used our 2 guys we trust, or our 2.5 guys, if you want to include Duran in there, although he's struggled lately too. It's like, well, we've used them. So now who's on the mound? Well, it's Ronnie Henriquez and Michael
Yeah.
Tonkin. And, they lose the final game of the series with Caleb Thielbar on the mound. And I realize that's extra innings and some of the guys had pitched and stuff, but the overall quality of the bullpen is just a huge mismatch, especially second half performance. The Twins have basically had the worst bullpen in the league now for a month, and the Guardians just have a phenomenal bullpen. But it's beyond just the overall quality. It's like you said, it's the quantity. It's just the
Yeah.
options that
Yep.
Stephen Vogt
You just run
has
out of
like
bullets. Right.
5 or 6 buttons he can push at any time, and they play more close games than anybody. I mean, Cleveland,
Sure.
all they do is play close games, but they feel like they can be cleaner and smoother and tighter, and they feel like we can just continue to. It's like a clown car. Their bullpen guys just keep coming out of there with
That's
a
right.
190 ERA, and the Twins. They don't play as clean. They don't play as smooth. The defense isn't as good. The clutch hitting obviously has just been completely absent, especially
Right.
against Cleveland this season. They hit 170 off Cleveland with runners in scoring position this year, and you might go, well, that's a small sample. It's like 115 plate appearances or something like that. I mean, they played them
Yeah.
13 times. So, and then but the bullpen is the biggest difference, I would say, is that Baldelli's got like 2 buttons he can push where he feels good about it. And honestly, even one of those, Griffin Jax blew a game in this series. But overall, Griffin Jax has been fantastic. And overall,
Sure.
Cole Sands has been fantastic. Once you press those 2 buttons, and if you press those 2 buttons 2 days in a row, on the third day, you're going to have to press some other buttons. Every other button is this might work, or there's a 50% chance this leads to chaos, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And
Right.
that's the difference here. And that can make any manager look bad, whether they're bad or neutral or good. And meanwhile, Stephen Vogt, I'm going to guess, is probably going to win Manager of the Year in his first year.
Yeah, it could be.
We should also note Rocco Baldelli won Manager of the Year in his rookie year as a manager because
Sure.
he had a team that hit 4,000 home runs and made him look good,
That's right.
which he also jokes about. He said, I didn't have to do a damn thing during my rookie year as a manager. I just said I didn't pinch hit. I didn't pinch run. I just waited for the home run. So uh, they go 3-4 in Cleveland. They go 3-10 overall versus Cleveland this season. They're done with him now, thankfully. Uh, within that 3-10 record, 5 1-run losses and 3 walk-off losses. That is maximum pain because you're in those games,
Yep.
and often it's tied.
And
at
you're using
various
up your bullpen.
You're
Right.
using up your bullpen. You're getting your hopes up. It inevitably ends the worst possible way, 3 walk-offs. And that's, by the way, 3 walk-offs. They only played them on the road 7 times. You can't be walked off at home.
Right.
So 3 out of the 7 games in Cleveland ended in a walk-off. And yet it feels, because now the Twins are 10-20 in their last 30 games, which is worse than every team but the White Sox, who are literally the worst team of all time, and the Angels, who are, the worst team of the last decade, probably, or one of them. And yet, it feels like this thing's over. It feels like they have completely
Right.
collapsed, which they have. It feels like all momentum is gone. It feels like, oh my God, Detroit can't lose and the Twins can't win. And yet, you look and they're tied. And not only they're tied, but the Twins have the tiebreaker over Detroit. They also have the tiebreaker over Kansas City and Seattle and possibly Boston, although Boston's pretty much done.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean that which is the good news is they're coming up, right? This the Boston has been struggling almost as not almost as much as the Twins. No team has been struggling almost as much as the Twins. The Twins have been truly brutal. None of the competitive teams have been
yeah,
struggling anywhere
it's
near that
close
amount.
though. They've been bad.
They've been bad. I mean, they haven't won. I think they won back-to-back games, something like twice in the last month. Like you take a look at what they've been doing for the last month, they just, they're 5, 6, 7 games underneath 500 themselves. So
Yeah, I think, Twins have 9 games left. Like you said, they're at Boston starting tonight. We're recording this Friday morning. Starting tonight, 3 at Fenway, which those are always difficult. It's not
right.
an environment that lends itself to the road team having success just in general. Then they come back home. They have Monday off. You get 3 versus Miami at home, and then you finish with 3 versus Baltimore. Now, I think there are 2 things to remember here. One is it's looking more and more like Baltimore will not really have much to play for, that
Yeah,
they're going to be locked in probably to the number 1 wild card. They've kind
right.
of let the division slip away. The Yankees are, have almost clinched that division.
Right now, the Yankees are 4 games up on Baltimore. Right.
Right. With
So
9 to play, that's going to be tricky for
it's gonna be
them.
hard for them
And
to come back on that. Right.
in Baltimore, they could still slip to the second wild card, but I think it's probably fairly unlikely. So if the Twins can get to that final weekend, they're facing a Baltimore team that's really talented, obviously. But if they're facing a Baltimore team that doesn't need to win games, then you're not going to face like Corbin Burns or, whatever pitcher you're afraid of.
Right.
Their bullpen usage is going to be different. They might rest some regulars and all that. So that would be good. But the other thing, while we think about that final weekend, that is not very much not in the Twins' favor, is that Detroit finishes against a double A team known as the Chicago White Sox.
Right.
So you need to be at worst tied with Detroit heading into that final weekend because you cannot count on the Chicago White Sox winning even one of those 3 games, obviously. I mean, you just cannot count on
White
that.
Sox might have something to play for.
What? No, I
Not
don't even
being
think they will.
not being the worst team in
No,
history.
I think they
I don't think they will either. They're 36 wins, 117 losses right now. I think the record is 120 losses, right? That was the
they're
Mets
going to
in
have it.
61.
They'll have it before the final weekend, I think. I have faith in them. They'll be make history before then. But yeah,
We need them to go on a little win streak so they have something to play for.
yeah. So it's going to be tough for the Twins to, for instance, catch Detroit from behind. I mean, it's going to be
Yes.
it's going to be impossible. Now, they don't have to catch Detroit from behind. They're tied right now, but
Right.
they're essentially up a game because they have the tiebreaker, and that's going to end up being huge. I mean, if the Twins didn't have that, it would be a much worse picture right now for them. And it's pretty bad as is. I mean, they're
Yeah.
basically slightly better than a coin flip. And
Yeah.
that's if you assume momentum is not a thing. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah. Right. I mean,
That's just
if you
from
ignore where both teams have been playing, how both teams have been
right.
playing for the last month.
Right.
Right.
And so I don't know why you ignore that necessarily, but it's basically in the span of 3 or 4 weeks now, the Twins have gone from not only 95% playoff odds, but roughly like 35 to 40% American League Central odds to now Cleveland has won the division essentially. The Twins have 0% chance effectively to win the division, and their playoff odds are basically now a coin flip.
Right.
So you've seen those drop in half, and your chances of repeating as division champions have vanished completely. So yeah, if you're a Twins fan and you say this seems really bad, it's really bad. It also though shows that wins in April, wins in June, wins in July matter just as much as wins in September. And the only reason the Twins are even in position now to stumble into the playoffs if they can just go 500 or better maybe here is that they had a pretty good record through mid-August. And then you start to think about games that they lost that they should have won in the first half or in
Right.
August.
Yeah.
Obviously that first Texas game or the fourth Texas game, the loss
Right.
where they had a 4-0 lead in the 7th inning and Elko comes at that. We didn't realize it at the time. It just seemed like a horrendous loss, obviously, but that's the point at which the collapse
really began. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
They had won three in a row. They were 70-53. Their playoff odds, like I said, were like literally 95%. And since then, they're 10-20.
Yeah.
So you don't know, you don't see it all the time. Although certainly that's the type of loss that has an after effect. I think just for
Yeah.
the you would hope
Yeah.
it's only a couple of
Well,
days
and
instead
yeah,
of
you're right. And they seem to have like two more losses like that within the next 5, 6 days. At the time, that was the talking point that everybody was, boy, what's going on with the bullpen? The bullpen's suddenly very thin. Well, that has continued and had pile on to that with a starting rotation that has trouble getting, much length out of it other than the top two veterans at the top of the rotation. And then you've got a lineup that just isn't hitting.
yeah.
To
It's
yeah.
they're functioning on no cylinders.
No, that's right.
Uh,
You're right.
the rookie starters, it's funny because they haven't been bad
No,
necessarily. I mean, Zebby's had a couple of blowups, obviously, but Simeon Woods Richardson has done the job all season. I mean,
sure.
if you just look at
Including
his
yesterday, by the way.
right, he wasn't bad, but what we're seeing is these guys are worn down. These
Right.
guys are not used to, not even from a inning standpoint, which they're all past career high innings, but just from a 6 month of competition standpoint,
Right.
they're not used to this. And so instead of getting 5 2/3, you're getting 4 2/3 from them. Instead of having them go through a lineup maybe two times, you're getting through 1.5 and going, maybe we get the bullpen going here. And this bullpen can't do a normal job. This bullpen sure as hell can't do the job when they're being asked to carry, extra weight for a rotation that, like you said, 3/5 of the spots are struggling just to get 15 outs per game. So we've seen both of those things come together in some, pretty bad pitching here. I mean, they're last in WPA for a pitching staff over the last 30 games. They're also dead last out of 30 in all relief numbers,
Right.
basically.
Yeah. Yep.
And the only thing keeping the starter in rotation from collectively being like last in ERA, last in WPA, is that Pablo Lopez is 4-0 with a 1.11 ERA and 6 starts during that time. You remove him,
Yeah.
the other 4 starters are 1-11 with a 5.60 ERA during that time. Now, the 1-11 is partly because they have a 5.60 ERA and partly because, as you mentioned a minute ago, the lineup's also been terrible too.
Right. Yeah. And,
Uh,
and I mean, like you're lumping in Ober with those other four. Well, Ober had one really crappy outing in there to
yes.
sort of to make sure that he's part of that group. But other than that, he's been pretty good as well. So
Yeah,
hey,
although Ober also had one outing where he was allowed to stay in and gave
well,
it up,
it's
and
true.
then
Yeah.
2 outings where he was pulled and everyone got all upset and the bullpen gave it up. So,
Exactly right. Yeah.
whichever button gets pushed with Ober seems to not go particularly well either way.
Would you like some good news?
Yeah, okay.
Beer exists.
Yeah.
And it can help during these losses. And so that's why I would recommend our first sponsor, our presenting sponsor, Black Stack Brewing. You can now find Black Stack beer all over the state of Minnesota, from Grand Marais to Rochester, Winona to Fargo. You can find your favorites. Their flagship, I think, is the local 755 New England IPA. If you like IPAs, if you like hazy-ish IPAs, they make a slew of good ones like that. They've also got a Pilsner. They've got a great rhubarb sour. If people are getting into that, they've got some THC seltzer that's made with real fruit. And you can find out all the different places where they are on their where to buy page on their website. And I, we both enjoyed their beers, and I know that several other Twins beat writers and so on enjoy Black Stacks Brewing and the quality that goes in them. They are known for their beer, and that is something that is not every local craft brewery can say. People want to work with Black Stack Brewing because their beer is so good. So go take a look for it at your local liquor store. So you can stop by their actual tap room on near 494 and 280, or even easier, just ask for them at your local liquor store.
Our second sponsor is their sister,
Yeah,
basically
yeah,
cousin,
that's it. Yeah,
sister,
yeah.
which is Brixworth
Yeah.
in North Loop. And Brixworth has beer,
Yes.
but also has really good Detroit style pizza,
Yes.
burgers, fries. What else do they have? They got
Wings.
Wings, yes.
The wings have been recommended to me. They've got a dry rub wing seasoning that has been raved about by people who are more of wing aficionados than I am.
and they're in the North Loop, blocks from Target Field.
Yeah, like one block from
Yeah.
Target Field, one long block from Target Field. Right.
It's a perfect spot. It's in the old Darby spot if people used to hang out at Darby's. Good inside of the restaurant.
Right.
but a great patio. So
Yeah.
as this final homestand here, when the weather's going to be, fall like instead of 100 degrees, probably, hopefully, great spot to hang out pregame, postgame. If the
Yeah.
Twins are losing, maybe mid game.
I've gotten several text
Yeah.
messages from people from over some of those blowout losses in the last homestands, and I've moved on to Brixworth at the sixth inning. They're just one block from Target Field, Gate 6, where the North Star line is. You just Google Brixworth, that's BRICKSWORTH, and follow the signs of their great patio. Or you can join them at their, they also have a Burnsville location. You can watch the games on TV there.
Okay. So just to kind of reset where the Twins are at, or uh, one thing that we hadn't really discussed until now is the idea that Detroit could pass not only the Twins,
Right.
but Kansas City as well.
Right.
And then the Twins would be trying to catch Kansas City. They also, crucially, have the tiebreaker over the Royals, which means if they can tie them, they win. I think that's a realistic thing at this point, too. I mean, I certainly wouldn't have seen that coming 3 weeks ago, or
Well,
even,
I mean, as hot as Detroit has been, the 3-game win streak they had happened versus the Royals, so that worked
yeah.
out pretty well for the Twins. They're just 2 games back of the Royals. You're correct.
And then the last thing, we talked a little bit about the final weekend of the season. Twins are facing Baltimore, and Detroit is facing the Little League All-Star. Not even the Little League All-Stars. The Little League non-stars, Chicago White Sox. The one thing I would watch there, it's one thing if Baltimore doesn't necessarily have to be competitive in that series. That would change who the Twins are facing. But if the Twins have to win those games, and they almost surely will have to win at least one of those games. I mean, I can't imagine a scenario where they've clinched a playoff spot with an entire series left. That would be
Right.
somewhat miraculous right now. It's possible, I guess. Starting Lopez and or Ober
Yeah.
in one or two of those last 3 games, obviously you do it if you need to win those games because you have to do whatever you need to do to get into the playoffs, clearly. But if you do that, whoever starts isn't going to be available for game 1 of the playoffs. And there are scenarios where you also wouldn't have them available for game 2 of the playoffs. And if you don't have Lopez and or Ober for game 1 and or game 2 of the 3-game playoff series, you're screwed anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not going to win with, Simeon Woods Richardson, David Festa, and then, maybe Lopez in game 3 or something like that. You go to Houston with that, you should not expect to come back with wins.
I think the way they line up right now is Lopez pitching Friday and Ober pitching Sunday. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And
Yeah.
if whoever pitches Friday could probably pitch game 2
Yes.
of the AL's of the wild card. So you could have, if you clinch it such that Ober doesn't have to pitch on Sunday,
Right. He
Ober could
pitches
pitch
game
game
1.
1, and then you would have Lopez available for game 2.
Right.
All right.
So that's something to watch. Now, I guess given their free fall and where they're at with 9 games left,
Right.
I would kind of categorize needing to pitch Ober and Lopez during that series as a positive outcome for the Twins because it means
Yes,
they're still alive
right.
and winning those games could propel them into the playoffs. Now, I
Fair.
wouldn't have said that again 3 weeks ago or even 10 days ago, but that's kind of where they're at.
Yeah, I mean, all these scenarios are possible so long as they start winning some games. The problem is they're
Right.
just not winning any games.
Yeah.
This isn't a situation where we can kind of run out the clock. This is you've got what, 9 games left, right? And they've got to win 5 or 6 of them, and they have not taken a series here in. I guess they did first half of the series versus the Angels, the first game of that homestand versus the Angels. They took a series, but other than that, have they taken another series in the past?
5 years, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. 3 or 4 weeks.
I mean, yeah, they have 9 left. I would say going 5-4, you'll get into the playoffs because that's essentially going 6-3 because you have the tiebreak over Kansas or Detroit.
Maybe,
Now, I mean,
maybe.
Look, if Detroit just doesn't lose, then that's a whole nother thing.
Well,
Although,
and if you give Detroit 3 wins off the top, now then they have to go 3-3 versus the Orioles and the
true.
Orioles and the Rays, and that's possible too.
But the thing about Detroit, and I mean, they deserve a lot of credit for turning their season around.
Amazing.
I thought they would be this type of team this season. I mean, when we were doing our over-under picks, I thought Detroit, I picked over on Detroit, over, I don't know, 81 wins or whatever it was. And I thought Kansas City would be the team that would disappoint. and I'm obviously very, very wrong about Kansas City. They surpassed their over under about 3 months ago, I think.
Sure.
But it ends up that Detroit ended up being pretty dangerous for some of the reasons I thought. They got some good young hitters, Riley Green, and then they have Tarek Skubal as one of the best pitchers in baseball. They've also pieced together a pretty good bullpen trio, at least. And so, but here's the truth about it: like they deserve a ton of credit. They were below 500. It's almost right at the point where we're talking about the Twins starting their collapse. A few days before that, the Tigers started their turnaround, and nobody noticed initially because they were like, I don't know, 8 games below
Yeah,
500 or
that's
something
about
like that
right.
at
Yeah.
that point. They were a distant fourth in this division, and they had a bunch of injuries, and they had guys like Torkelson who weren't living up to the hype and all that. I think they demoted him back to AAA, and so they were just kind of out of sight, out of mind. They have the best record in baseball since then, and they deserve a lot of credit for that, obviously. However, if the Twins just got their head out of their butts and played even like below 500, just like
Right.
run of the mill bad over the last 30 games, this thing would be over already.
Yeah. If they went 13 and 17 instead
Right,
of
which
10
is
and 20,
terrible.
right? Yeah, right. Right.
This thing would already effectively be over. And so, yes, the Tigers deserve a lot of credit, but it's only possible because the Twins opened the door as wide open as you could possibly open it. They knocked down the whole wall and said, just walk right through there too.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's part of it. That's not gonna make Twins fans feel any better, but that's part of the equation here. So it also, I don't know. You can't help but think back 2 years ago when the Twins were 62 and 55 through August 19th. What we're talking about was through August 17th
Yeah.
this year. So right around the same time, and then they finished 16 and 29 for the worst record in baseball. Right now, they have the third worst record in baseball since over the last month. And that one was essentially all injuries.
Yeah, that's right. It felt very different at the time. I mean, at the time, you just took a look at the lineup and you said, this is the Saints. This is a souped up Saints lineup, a Saints lineup with a couple of guys on rehab, professionals on rehab versus
Right.
Cleveland versus various teams, and you were like, ah, no wonder they're losing. It was hard to beat up on the team because you just had so many players out. This time, I don't know how many of the guys that are in the lineup right now are playing healthy, so that might be a part of it. But yeah, it feels very different this time. It not only worries me just for this last week and a half, these last 9 games, and whether or not they're going to make the postseason. It worries me about like the lineup going forward. That this team a month and a half ago, I had every confidence that this team was going to be, a pretty good, pretty young, uh, high octane team for potentially years to come. You took a look at the top 5, 6 people in that lineup. They were almost all 1 year, 2 years worth of service time, going to be under contract for a long time. And you had lots of reinforcements sitting there in the Saints and AAA that potentially could be difference makers as well. And now, I mean, I'm taking a look at it. It's like, geez, yeah, how much faith do I have? I mean, how much faith do I have in rookies or how much faith do I have in Royce Lewis being a superstar? How much faith do I have in Julian ever figuring it out? How much faith do I have in Jose Miranda being the player we saw in the middle of the year versus the end of the year? As well as you can always say, and how much faith do I have that Correa is going to have a healthy year? We're ever going to get the 300 game benchmark
Sure.
that we hoped out of Lewis and Correa and Buxton for an entire season. It calls into this kind of slump. The fact that this slump is so extended calls into question lots of things about the
Yeah.
future as well as about just the next 9 days.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, injuries did play a factor in this, a large
Sure.
factor. I mean, during this 10 and 20 stretch, they were without Buxton and Correa for 90% of that.
Right.
And like you said, a lot of the guys are banged up. Kepler's been out.
Right.
Some of the names you mentioned have been playing, at less than 100%, but it's
Right.
different than 2022 in that 2022, they led all of baseball in days lost to the
Right.
injured list,
Right.
Projected wins above replacement lost to the injured list. This year, they're like above average, but they're nowhere near the top of the league in that regard. And I remember covering the team in 2022. There were days we'd go into Baldelli's office pregame and we'd say, "Hey, the lineup isn't posted yet. What's the deal?" And he would literally say, "Well, we have 8 healthy guys cleared to play." we're putting three guys through pregame workouts, and whoever's the least injured of the three is going to be the
Right.
ninth guy in the lineup.
Right.
And then we'll figure out the defense from there
That's
because
right.
we'll
Yeah.
just have the
Right.
9 hitters. And that's
And
where
by
they
the
were
way,
at.
we do know that Nick Gordon is batting cleanup. That much we've got
Yeah.
straight out.
And Jay Cave's our leadoff man. And yeah, I mean, it was
Right.
gross.
Right. It was,
It
forgot
was
Jake Cave.
truly,
Right.
they had like Sandy Leone playing.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
it was pathetic. And this isn't that. And right now, obviously, Buxton and Correa have looked pretty good, I would say, coming back.
Yeah.
I mean, they've taken some days off in there as expected, but they've both looked pretty good. I think they're both running around pretty good, given their injuries. They're both hitting. Correa's been getting on base like at a, I don't know, 600 clip. He's had some clutch moments
Yeah,
already.
he sure has.
So, now they have those guys for the final 9. I don't know how many of the final 9. If we're saying there's 9 games they could each possibly play, so that's 18 possible games between Buxton and Correa, what would you set the over-under for total games
For the
played?
total, so total of 18, right?
Yeah, 9 each. Yeah.
15 and a half.
Oh, I was going to say 12 and a half.
Yeah, I think they're not going to be resting much. I mean, I think we saw them, I think they're both going to be insisting on being in the lineup on a pretty regular basis, and the Twins are in. I mean, let me rephrase that. Let's see if how early they get knocked out of this postseason. Like, I'm not sure that either of them are going to be playing at the last 2 games versus the Orioles.
I mean,
So I should probably
15,
included that in my calculus.
15 and a half, I will very quickly take the
Take
under
the
on
under.
that.
Okay.
I mean, I just think even if they're healthy, that's a decent under. You know what I mean?
Give me how about for the next 6 games? The 3 versus Boston and the 3 versus the Marlins. How many? What's your over under number there?
Out of 12, I would say, I don't know,
Because
nine and
I
a
can't
half.
predict that last weekend. That last weekend's crazy. Yeah, I would go with 9.5 then too.
All right.
Wait,
Well, there you go. Uh, let's see so yeah, second time in 3 years they've collapsed, and then 3 years ago, 2021, they didn't have to collapse. They just stunk.
right,
By the time they got to this point in the
right,
season,
right,
it was
right. That's
it
right.
was a mess. So that's not a great 3 of the last 4 years. Now they won the division title last year, obviously, but there wasn't a whole lot of competition. They were
And the 2
just
years before that.
well, 2 years before that, I don't count. Who knows what would have happened? They were basically
Right.
tied at the 60 game mark. They
Right.
couldn't.
No,
They
I think they won the. I think they did win at the 60 game mark of
yes,
the 2021. I think they were tied and won the tiebreakers to win the division.
yeah, in 2020, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, we can't. Maybe they would have collapsed then too. Who
Well,
knows?
that's a good point. That's fair.
So the thing I wrote about this morning, and we don't have to do a long rant on it because
So, are you suggesting maybe they bring back Ron Gardenhire, who always was known for finishing strong when he had a competitive team in August and September? Is that
yeah. Although it helped that those divisions stunk too. They were like last year's division,
That's
pretty
it.
much.
That's it.
It helped when you could win it with 85 wins or whatever, 87 wins sometimes. But uh, what I wrote about this morning, we can do a quick version of it, I guess, because people hopefully will read what I wrote about it. But the level to which the pitching has collapsed. I mean, we talked about the bullpen, but you basically have 2 starters you trust, then you have 3 spots filled by rookies who are just trying to get through 4 innings at this
Right.
point. And then, as we mentioned, you got Jackson Sands that you trust. You got Duran, who you're acting as if you still trust, even if you don't, because you just, I mean, what else are you
Well
going to do?
done. Well done. That's about
And
right.
then,
Yeah, that's a good way
if
of
you
putting
want,
it.
they got 6 other guys in that bullpen besides those 3 that we just named. There isn't a single one of those 6 that I would trust with a 2-run lead, like in the 6th or the 7th inning, really. And we've seen that. Ronnie Henriquez, he's pitched okay for like 12 innings, so they were like, all right, close it out.
Yep.
Caleb Thielbar for the, I don't know, 10th time this season, they've said, all right, you've put together a good week here. Let's put him back into a spot that matters. And that's a tough spot coming in where
Sure.
your team doesn't score in extra innings, and then or your team, yeah, they scored twice, but
Yeah, they did.
in extra innings,
That's what was so painful about it.
he has struggled all year basically, and he's 37 years old or something like that. And I think you start to look at like the Michael Tonkins of the world, and obviously they sent down Alcala because he was so bad during that stretch. They just don't. They don't have anybody they can turn to,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
they're going with Cole Irvin, who was claimed off waivers.
Right. I know.
And he's pitching like key spots in the 6th and the 7th
He's
inning. And
the
I'm like,
fireman. Yeah.
yeah. I texted the snarky beat writer group chat, and I said, I think the Twins' biggest problem at this point is they can't get Cole Irvin on the playoff roster. But I mean, it's just, I said it before, but like there are 9 bullpen buttons that Baldelli can push. And it's like, be careful what you push, Rocco. 6 and possibly 7 of these lead to an explosion. Be careful. Go ahead and push a button. And it's like, what? I'm not saying he's managed it brilliantly or anything. I don't know how anybody can make it down the stretch playing close games like this with a rotation that is only going, 4 or 5 innings 60% of the time and not look like a moron.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like how can you look good bringing in Ronnie Henriquez and Michael Tonkin and a 37-year-old Caleb Thielbar and Cole Irvin, and you had Elko until they demoted him. He had given up 8 homers in the second half. Like
when you've got rookies, especially when you've got rookie starters going 4 innings, 4 and a third innings. Yeah.
And so as you talk about the hitting has collapsed also. I don't think the defense has been any great shakes here for the last all season really, but for the last month or so. But it's hard not to look at the collapse of the pitching staff, especially when not only did ownership cut the payroll by 30 million coming off your first successful playoff run in 20 years, but then, and I think that was a real obstacle for the front office. We talked a lot about this at the time, early on in the season and at the trade deadline and everything. But at some point, you also have to look at the front office and say they acquired 6 pitchers, either during the offseason via trades and free agency or at the trade deadline. And none of those 6 pitchers are on the roster right now. And they combined for a 5-something ERA. 2 of them, DeSclafani and Topa, have not thrown a pitch and may not throw a pitch for the Twins. And then you have Okert, who was released or designated for assignment after performing horribly. You have Jay Jackson, who was released before the trade deadline. You have Josh Staumont, who was released before the trade deadline. And then at the trade deadline, the only move you made when people were screaming, you need some pitching help. You're running on fumes here. You bring in Trevor Richards, who pitched 12 innings or something and was cut too. So, yes, the ownership reducing the payroll by 20%, which was about 30-something million, severely tied the hands of the front office. And it caused them to look at these low wattage bullpen and rotation moves. It caused them to say,
They had to start purchasing lottery tickets for the most part. Now, I wouldn't say Topa was a lottery ticket. I'd say DeSclafani was a salary dump.
Sure.
I don't necessarily count those as pickups. I count Topa as a serious pickup, although that was also to some extent we got to trade away Polanco or something. Let's see what we can get back in this. I think Topa's bad luck. The rest of them I consider kind of, these are somewhat lottery tickets. I mean, they knew that Staumont wasn't anything special necessarily. Right. They knew that he was a big risk. Okert was a trade for Nick Gordon because he was out of options. You might as well just swap one out of option player for another. Like none of these were, hey, let's get serious about beefing up our bullpen, with the exception, like I said, of Topa probably, who was hurt. Even the trade deadline thing, like you mentioned, ownership cutting payroll $30 million in the offseason, which, by the way, every time somebody says that, I almost want to correct them. Like, yeah, they kind of cut it 40 million because you probably should have gone up 10 million.
True.
Right? I mean, like
let's call it 35.
Yeah. Let's make sure that we understand from Derek Falvey's standpoint that how much money he ended up losing on that deal. Even more crazy to me than the $30 or $40 million is having that tight a rein on moves at the trade deadline.
Right.
Like not being able to free up $3-4 million at the trade deadline for a team that is competing, for a team that is at the time competing for a division crown, let alone, looked to be on their way for the postseason and some extra money in the postseason.
A team, by the way, at that point, who had done their job despite having the payroll cut, despite being kneecapped by ownership.
I'll even add one more piece. A team that was about to start playing on TV again. You,
Yeah,
you
it's
on
true.
August 1st, they were immediately after that trade deadline, people were going to be able to start watching them on TV again. 80% of your market can end up watching them again.
It is funny, not funny, haha, but funny, sad that it's basically as soon as they got back on TV, back on
Right.
Comcast and everything, they went 10-20. And people were probably like, wait, maybe we were better off not being able
Right.
to watch
Yeah,
this
we got to
team.
watch April and we got to watch August and September.
Yeah, you would think this is the worst team in Twins history.
Right. That's right.
But yeah, I think we're sort of in agreement. I think, like I always say on the show, multiple things can be true, and people have a hard time with that in life, in sports, whatever. But I think ownership should not by any means be let off the hook here. And I think if anything, the fact that this is the exact scenario that any fan paying any attention, and that includes both of us, was fearful of in November, December, February, March, April at the trade deadline, which is if you're cutting resources and you're shedding talent, and as you said, pretty much every guy you're bringing in, 5 or 6 guys, are kind of low wattage. Let's hope we catch something here with one or two of these guys. The fear was you're 1 or 2 injuries to pitcher away, a good pitcher,
Right.
which is inevitably going to happen with pitchers, especially, but you're just running out of pitching.
Right.
And it's precisely what happened. And so I think it's like doubly frustrating that everyone knew. They said, don't go around that corner. There's the guy in the hockey mask around
Right.
that corner.
Right.
Let me just go. I'll just go check what's around that corner. Oh, no, Joe's dead over there. He's got a stab wound, and there's a guy in a hockey mask running away. And it's like, what a moron. It's like
Right.
everyone knew this was going to happen. There's no empathy for that, I think. And so, but beyond that, no matter what your resources are, the job of the front office, and I'm sure Derek Falvey will tell you, they should have done a much better job at this. I mean, if there's anything this front office fancies itself as good at, now I would say the actual results are, let's call it a mixed bag, but they think they can find scrap heap pitching. They think they can identify relievers and pitch mix changes and mechanical tweaks, and sometimes they can. But they went 0 for 6 on that. And these were big whiffs. These were not, productive outs. These were 0 for 6 with 6 strikeouts on the 6 pitchers they added,
Right.
which, via trade, free agency, and then at the deadline also. And if your resources are being cut by 30 or 35 million and you're parting with talent, you're letting guys like Sonny Gray walk via free agency, obviously, and your solution to that, now you're forced to shop in the scratch and dent aisle because you don't have any resources. And that absolutely increases the degree of difficulty. It compromises the decision-making process. It just turns your options, you're shopping for day old here,
Right.
and hoping it's not stale already. And so, yes, those guys are going to flop more often than just a typical signing. However, going 0 for 6 is unforgivable in any circumstance. I mean,
Yeah.
you cannot come up with one decent relief pitcher right now who could pitch the 7th inning. It has played a huge part in the collapse of this bullpen, especially. And then the other thing that I think they clearly misjudged was the effectiveness, readiness, and durability of Chris Paddock. We heard all offseason, and even at the end of last season when he initially came back to throw a few innings out of the bullpen, oh, he'll replace Sonny Gray. Like he'll fill a rotation spot there.
Right.
Well,
Not necessarily overall effectiveness, but in terms of
yes.
one of the rotation spots, sure.
And it was like, you sure? Coming back off 2 Tommy Johns and all that? Oh no, he's good to go. He's throwing better than ever, all that. Well, he showed some flashes early on, but he basically posted a 5 ERA in half a season, got shut down, and hasn't been seen again.
Right.
And so that has then opened up another spot in the rotation, along with DeSclafani, who they were hoping would be a low cost, toss in that could at least, bide them some time for the first half before they had to dip into the minor league depth. And instead, he never threw a pitch. So they had to turn to Varlin immediately and then Simeon Woods Richardson right after that. And then you lose Paddock basically at midseason. And, you just keep waiting for him to come back, and he's never going to come back. And so then that opens the door for Festa, and that opens the door then when Joe Ryan gets hurt, which has been a huge loss for them, obviously, for Zebby. And that's how you find yourself with 60%, a majority rookies in the rotation. And then you look at the bullpen and you go, They got 2.5 guys they trust. And you go, well, yeah, they went 0 for 6 on bringing guys in. This was, in their minds, this was going to be Jay Jackson or Stamont or Okert or Topa,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah.
And to provide
The
zero
the key
help.
word in that sentence, by the way, was or. Like I don't think they thought they were going to hit on all of
Right.
them. They were just trying to hit on one or two of them, and they hit on zero. Right.
And here's the truth. If you go 2 for 6 on those 6 pitchers that we named, it's a much different situation right now.
Yeah.
You've certainly avoided 1 or 2 losses, I would say, just based on the collapse of the pitching staff here. You know, if DeSclafani could have just gotten you 60 innings instead of 0 innings, then Simeon Woods Richardson doesn't join the rotation until, let's say, June 1st. And maybe Simeon Woods Richardson's got a little more gas left in the tank right now. Or if, Topa is not out of the picture completely, maybe it's Topa on the mound instead of Ronnie Henriquez or Michael Tonkin or whatever it is. And so I do think the top of certainly my list, but I would say any fan's list should be, especially when it was so obvious. Everyone was fearful. The same thing. Everyone saw this coming. How can ownership, kneecapping the front office and really the players too, before this thing even started and have it turn out exactly the way people thought it was going to turn out? How can they not be to blame? But then within that, the front office flopped. I mean, the front office was given much worse choices and much fewer resources, but they couldn't come up with one decent relief pitcher at any point in the last 10 months.
To be fair though, that's what happens when you're working with zero payroll, right? Like when your payroll is not just zero, it's minus 10. We need you to cut $10 million of payroll and find some good pitching.
Sure, but they still spent,
sure,
I don't know, $10 million on those 6 guys.
Yeah, fair.
You should, I mean, if you're not capable of finding relievers for $1 million or $2, why are you signing them?
Yeah.
Because you don't have guys developed, by the way, in the minors that you could have turned to as relievers. That's part of the problem too. So a lot of blame to Grona. And then again, I don't think Baldelli has done a particularly great job, obviously, but also, if the front office had their hands tied by ownership, certainly Baldelli has had his hands tied by the front office and then also by ownership, because who's he supposed to bring into these games? Like, who's he supposed to? I don't know. And so and then certainly the players. I don't mean to act like the players themselves. I mean, they're the ones losing these games. But
Right.
I think a lot of these guys, and to your point, you can point to big names, Lewis and Miranda and all that, and obviously Buxton Correa being hurt, Joe Ryan being hurt, Brock Stewart being hurt. That was a huge one for the bullpen. They never really recovered from that because that was right around the trade deadline. Also,
You're right.
I mean, the players are responsible for their performance, but I also think that a lot of these guys either shouldn't be in the majors for a contending team, or at the very least should not be, the ones on the mound trying to close out victories on the road in Cleveland or that sort of thing. And so it just kind of trickles down. It starts with the front office cutting 30 million at the worst possible time. Then it goes to ownership doing that. Then it goes to the front office whose hands are tied, but even with their hands tied, they went 0 for 6 bringing in pitching. And then it goes to the manager who, thanks to all that, is looking around. He's got 4 guys he can hand the ball to, including starters, that he can trust. And then it goes to, well, some of the guys you thought you could trust aren't performing or are injured.
Yeah.
And then some of these other guys they should be at AAA right now. And instead they're in a pennant race. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's rough to look at. I think
what you just described was a sort of a snowball effect. And
yeah,
interestingly enough, like even when they were winning games at the beginning of August, we talked a little bit about how I'm not totally sure how they're winning these games. It feels like they're kind of on the edge of a knife, and if stuff starts to go bad, it could snowball. That we've got too many young people in the rotation, or too many rookies in the rotation. With the bullpen doesn't seem like it's got enough options. The lineup is getting a little banged up. We've got a couple guys hurt. It feels like more and more like if things start to go wrong, it could continue. And of course, that's exactly what we've seen. We've also let's cover a couple quick sponsors here before we move on to the next topic, which is Soda Stick. Twins Daily did their part to try and make the Twins have a successful week. We threw a big watch party, and Twins end up winning the day that we throw watch parties. And at that watch party, maybe Soda Stick did their part because they had a stand there showing all of their hats. And the reason they've just brought hats is because they've got a big sale going on right now. It's their end of summer sale. I think it was supposed to end last week, but they've extended it because it's been so popular. Just $22 gets you any of their hats. And they've got some beauties because they kind of thrive on Minnesota sports, including my favorite one that they have right now is this one that's got sort of a Twin Cities script on it, which kind of reminiscent of, I think would go well with if you've got one of the jerseys that have that sort of Twin Cities script with it. This hat is really good, and the best part of it is there's no code needed. Like I said, that's so popular that they're extending the offer, but it's a limited time. They're not extending it much longer. You're going to probably want to jump in on it this weekend or this week. It's limited time, so jump in and get one while you can. Also, while you're there, go to SodaStick Co. SodaStick.com or SodaStick.co. Just Google SodaStick, and you're going to be able to find all kinds of other stuff. It's, by the way, it's not just baseball stuff either. Like they've got hats and jerseys and everything else for Wild and Wolves and Vikings and Gophers. All the stuff that's all the teams that are firing up right now. So check out SodaStick for great stuff.
For the final homestand of the season, if you want to get some last minute tickets,
Right.
and you want to get good value, you should
Yeah.
download the Game Time app. Their specialty is hard to find tickets and last minute tickets. And the other thing they offer is within the app, you can kind of sort by best value. So they can compare what you'd be paying to what this ticket is sort of worth relative to the other spots. How good are the seats? How close are you to the
Right.
action? How rare are these to be kind of available even pregame if you're like looking to buy it an hour before the game? And the way this works is it's not a website, it's an app. So you have it on your phone. You can be walking to Target Field. John has done this, I assure you.
John has done it from the Brixworth patio.
Yeah, walking to Target Field, punch up the Game Time app, and you can grab tickets before you get to the gate, and then you just stroll right on in.
That's right. So you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. You just download the Game Time app. Do that now, right? And then you create an account. And when you do that, if you use the code Gleeman, you're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. But again, just create an account and a redeem code GLEEMAN for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it, Aaron Gleeman?
Game Time, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
So you want me to say Game Time? Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. I got distracted. A woman and a cat walked into the room.
Okay, all right.
Really throws me off. Makes me nervous. Both those things.
I thought you were going to tell a joke there.
Nope, no jokes, no humor when the Twins are losing, John.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so I mentioned during the 13 games against Cleveland, they went 18 for 106 with runners in scoring position. That's 170.
Wow.
And you might be saying to yourself, yeah, but were those 18? Were those homers? No. They had 5 extra base hits and 7 double plays grounded into.
It feels like all Cleveland did was hit homers. I think that's almost the only way they scored versus us.
And the Twins whiffed in 30% of their plate appearances with runners in scoring position, and that is odd for them this season. Wouldn't have been odd last season. The Twins strike out less than an average team. I don't even think people have quite realized that. People got so focused on strikeouts last year while they were setting an all-time record that they talked them into themselves.
Yeah, it was fair that they got focused on it.
Sure.
So we're clear. Sure.
Except the Twins had the second best offense in baseball in the second half of the season.
Right.
They've gone now from the highest strikeout rate in the history of baseball to striking out less than the average team this season, and they're going to score fewer runs.
Right.
And they're struggling down the stretch, whereas they thrived down the stretch last season. So just in the back of everyone's head, just keep in mind that strikeouts are not everything. They're just a type of out. Even if everyone gets all obsessed about them. But so looking at these 4 games, we don't need to go over them. It's going to make people want to cry. But I would say each of the 4 games had like its own little very clear storyline. Game 1 to me was Lopez pitching pretty well, running out of speed there or running out of steam there after like 6 innings. Jack's coming in and getting out of that jam, which was a huge moment. And then, as we've talked about quite a bit here with Griffin Jacks, he prefers not to come back out for a second inning, whether he gets 1 out in the previous inning or 3 outs in the previous inning. Not from a workload standpoint, although that's certainly a factor. I mean, if you use a guy for 2 innings too often, like we talked about with Class A, they only use him for 1 inning all the time. He won't be available. But Jax's thing is, from an emotional standpoint, from a adrenaline standpoint, he feels like he gets so hyped up to pitch that if he comes off the mound and then sits there for 12 minutes, or in the case of the Twins offense, 3 minutes, and then goes back out onto the mound, it's not going to be the same.
No.
And you watch him after he wriggles out of that jam for Lopez, and that is a hyped up, adrenaline filled person.
You are correct.
And then he comes out and he gives up the homer to Manzardo.
Who, by the way, just killed us.
Yeah. Here's the thing about Manzardo. Get used to it. He's a rookie,
Okay, yeah.
and they got him from Aaron Savali last year, and he was like a borderline top 100 prospect, but he can hit, definitely.
Yeah.
He struggled when they initially called him up, and this is kind of his second chance in the majors. But yeah, he's going to be well, maybe Josh Naylor will leave via free agency at some point, and he probably will try to replace him as the left-handed bat there. But for now, they got both of them, and that's not been very fun. But so I would say that was the story of the first game. Griffin Jax looking brilliant in his first inning, and then having a rare blow up in his second inning work. I would say the game 2, which is the one the Twins won 4-1, the story there was Zebby Matthews wasn't bad.
Right.
You know, again, can't complete 5, sort of like Simeon Woods Richardson yesterday, but not bad in the process, certainly giving them a chance to win, which is something the Twins talk about a lot. Castro hits the big homer there. They bring Duran in,
which, by the way, didn't put the Twins ahead or anything. It just gave them a little bit of breathing room. Like
which they
that was also like everybody's, I think, justly focused on that home run. What that did is it turned it from a close game into a not quite so close game, and that just gave everybody a lot more confidence, loosened them up a little bit.
And they needed it, by the way, because
right.
Duran comes in then to
Right.
because Jax had pitched the night before 2 innings. Duran comes in and try to close it out, and he runs into some trouble in the 9th.
Right.
After pitching in the 8th also. And then who's warming up? Griffin Jax.
Yep.
Who has to come in and kind of escape his jam too, and he does it successfully, in part because the Twins, like you said, got a little more breathing room with the Castro homer.
Right.
They win it 4-1.
Although I think by the time he finished it all out, bases were loaded, right? Like it was 4-1. Okay, right. Yeah.
We talked the next morning. We did a Patreon. If you want more Gleeman and the Geek, I know it's been a while since we did a free show, but we've been doing Monday and Wednesday episodes exclusively for Patreon subscribers. Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. So we talked Wednesday morning after the 4-1 win about, well, it's great that you got the win. You had to do whatever you had to get the win. But I remember saying, well, by virtue of using Jax there on the second day after he pitched 1+ the day before, you're definitely not going to have him available. And also Duran basically pitched 2 innings, so he might be somewhat
like
limited.
30 some pitches or something. Yep.
So then what happens? Game 3.
By the way, you know who else pitched that game before Duran? Ronnie Enriquez.
Yeah, Ronnie Enriquez threw a scoreless inning.
Yeah, right.
Then game 3, Ober's good. Ronnie Enriquez pitched game 3.
He pitched both 2 and 3.
Yeah, did he?
I'm almost sure of it. Yeah,
you might be right.
He pitched before.
You're right.
That's why him coming in game 3 was, I was like.
So game 3, Ober pitches strikes out career high 12 or whatever, gives up the 2 solo shots to Josh Naylor. Louis Varland comes in and pitches a great inning.
Yep.
Which they desperately needed.
By the way, I almost brought that up when you were talking about sort of where they're trying to get one more arm from the bullpen. When Varland had that crummy outing, 3 outings ago, something like that. His last 2 have been pretty good.
Yeah, and they need him because, again, who else do they have?
Right.
Correa comes through in a clutch spot, which is great, gives them a lead. But because of the usage the day before, or the 2 days before, Jax is unavailable. Duran can only go 1 inning.
Right.
And then you end up with what you just described, which is Ronnie Henriquez on the mound with the game on the line, and it goes poorly, obviously. Then game 4, Simeon Woods Richardson, much like Zebby, only allows the 1 run. He pitches just fine, but he can't make it through 5. Cole Irvin comes in as sort of long relief, but then stays in when it's a close game in the 6th, and he does okay. I mean, there were some base runners. He was dancing through it a little bit, but he does just fine.
He escaped. He escaped the 6th, right? Yeah.
The bullpen was actually pretty damn good in the last game of the series. I mean, everybody pretty much did their job. It gets it to extra innings. You've only allowed 2 runs. Then, we already talked about what happens at the end of that game, and they lose that one. And so those are all close. I feel like whether you look at the
But
score,
like you said at the beginning, what happened is in this game is they ran out of bullets.
right?
Right? They'd already gone. I mean, Irvin had already gotten. I mean, they had a short start from Richardson, which not that short, 4.2, but still a little bit shorter than it wasn't 7 like Ober or Lopez are going to provide. You've got Irvin already kind of pitching parts of 3 different innings, right? Sands has already been used. He was available. Louis Varland's already been used. He was available. Jax has already been used. He was available. And by the way, pitching three times in the last 4 games.
And he pitched
Duran
great.
yeah, Duran has already pitched back-to-back days, including a 30-pitch outing 2 days ago. Ronnie Enriquez already pitched back-to-back days. He's not available. And so, yeah, it's Caleb Thielbar on the mound for the 10th inning.
Right. And again, if the lineup does anything, you win that game before it gets to that point.
Right.
Or just in the 10th inning, if the lineup can score a run or two.
Right.
And they had opportunities and they couldn't do it. And so then you just leave Caleb Thielbar on the mound, and nobody, look, no offense to Caleb Thielbar, but nobody wants him on the mound in a tie game in the 10th inning at this point. But again,
the lineup had 3 hits yesterday. Right. I mean,
so yeah, those are all very similar.
Base runners because they had some guys get hit by pitches and some walks, but they had 3 hits.
Yeah.
It's amazing they scored 2 runs.
Yeah. So, you got very similar stories, whether you're looking at the final score or you're breaking it down kind of like we just did game by game. All 4 of those are very winnable games.
Sure. Yeah.
If you play those same 4 games a million times apiece, I'm sure the average outcome is 2 wins for each side, probably something like that. They're kind of similar in that the lineup either did nothing or just did a very little. One of the games the bullpen held, the other games the bullpen eventually didn't. But again, if the lineup comes through with any sort of breathing room or extra runs, their insurance runs there, they're not in those spots anyway. But ultimately, like we talked about with the contrast in the bullpens, the Twins are turning to Ronnie Enriquez, Michael Tonkin, and Caleb Thielbar in some of the biggest moments of their season. Yep. And Cole Irvin, who's fresh off the waiver wire, and just go ahead. Why not?
Yeah, that's right. Right.
And then the Guardians are just got a clown car full of guys with a 1.75 ERA, and that's the difference.
I was going to say, we should probably just talk a little bit about the Jorge Alcala move.
Yeah.
As when they picked up Irvin, they sent down Alcala. I think I was surprised that Alcala was the person who
everyone seemed surprised.
Right. We've seen them, I think a lot of people, if you got in your mind Alcala is a high leverage arm, why would they send him down? I mean, I think that's a fair point to have made 6 weeks ago, right? Within the last 4 weeks, after you've seen what he's done, and you've seen how much they've really gone out of their way to rest him. Like he's had 4 or 5 days off a couple different times since he started struggling after that Texas game, and he's been giving up home runs not just to left-handers, which has always been sort of his weakness. He's been, even when he was good 3 years ago before he had the injury issues that he had the last couple years, he was he's susceptible to left-handed hitting. He's been giving up big flies to right-handed hitters as well, and so on the one hand, I don't know if it was like, well, if we're going to try and get this guy some rest, let's get him some rest at St. Paul. I don't know if it was this guy's just not effective right now. We might as well be having him at AAA. I don't know if it was what Rocco claimed it was, which was, we need some length out of the bullpen because they're not using the guys that were left for length. Varland could have gone. I mean, Varland hasn't been going 2-3 innings. He's been going 1 inning because, like you said, they need the high leverage arms. And so, how much they trust them for, I'm not sure. But I was a little surprised that Alcala was the one that was sent down, but I also can see why it makes some sense.
So first half of the season, 35 innings for Alcala, 1.56 ERA, a little bit lucky. His secondary numbers weren't quite that good, but the reason he had a 1.56 ERA is he allowed 0 home runs in 35 innings. Right. When you're a relief pitcher, if you strike out a few guys and you don't walk a ton and you give up no homers, you're going to be successful, just in general. Second half of the season, 20 innings, 6.75 ERA, 8 homers allowed in 20 innings.
Wow.
Get a 19-4 strikeout to walk ratio. 2 things about that. One, to your point about them trying to rest him, he wasn't overworked for a lot of that, but the problem is you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube necessarily, especially for a guy with his injury track record. he was overworked in that right around that Texas series. I think he pitched 3 times in 4 days. They've also just their usage of him in the first half was just strange in general at times. They would sometimes ask him to throw 40 pitches because they quote unquote needed that length. And so I just wonder, given he hasn't thrown that many innings over the last 3 years because he's been
Right.
injured. And so either he just kind of wore down naturally, which is what we were talking about with rookie starters. When you get past the point, when you get into deeper water than you're used to swimming in, sometimes you sink a little bit. Or did they use him up? And you can say, "Oh, we'll give him a break here. We'll give him some time off," but that doesn't necessarily reset. I mean, the
Right.
damage might
Yep.
already be done there.
You're right.
And then the other thing is, to your point of, well, he just stunk. And regardless of
Right.
what the reason,
Right.
like why he stunk, and
Yeah.
maybe the Twins need to bear some blame for that as well. The the or I guess not big picture, but the small picture is that every time they brought him into a key spot, he gave up a home run.
Right.
And so you can try to
At some point, you lose the high leverage role, and
right.
that point is sometime between 0 and 8 home runs given up in 20 innings.
Yeah, I would say it was probably around 4 or 5.
Right. Yeah, if anything, he probably held onto that label a little too long.
Well, because they
Yeah.
just didn't. I mean, they were putting him out there because who else do they have?
Well, I mean, that's part of it, and then part of it is, a home run is it's not something that just kind of gives. You're kind of like, oh, that was kind of a fluky home run. Oh, that was kind of a fluky home run. Yeah.
Right.
But by the eighth one, you've run out of excuses. You've run out of reasons to trust that person. So
Yeah. So again, that's another. You remove a guy who in the first half, maybe a little bit of smoke and mirrors, but he pitched well in the first half. You remove that guy completely, not only off the roster now, but before that, he removed himself basically from a high leverage role and sunk a few wins in the process. That's another blow to the bullpen. Before we talk about, I don't know, I got a few other notes here to finish up. Let's do our last couple of sponsors here. So this, if you've seen John and I, we could both use this product, certainly.
we need to probably explore that. I've gotten to the point now where
Hims
I'm
is the
not.
product, by the
Yeah,
way.
the Hims hair growth, and Hims does a lot of different things. But one of the things they do is provide an access to a range of hair loss treatments that work, all from the comfort of your couch. You just go online, doctors, they'll give you the different options that you can talk about and what you can jump into. And as somebody who's 57, starting to lose, not starting to lose, have, definitely have my blonde hair and gray hair, don't always, you can't always tell the difference between them, but now it's starting to become a little more, little more clear. And that's the gray hair that I have left.
Yeah.
I don't have a
I was
lot
gonna say,
up here on
John,
the top,
they both kind
especially
of look scalp colored to me.
especially right now.
Sorry.
We're on this little Zoom call where we got like the background blurred because I'm in a hotel room and such. Yeah, my hair looks especially terrible right now,
Yeah.
and even cutting it super short. But Hims, I'm gonna be taking a look at it. I actually talked to Chrissy the other day about maybe I should take a look at Hims and see if they can check me out or
Yeah, you can
help me
start
out a little bit.
a free online visit today. Go to Hims, that's HIMS, hims.com/Gleeman, HAIMS, hims.com/Gleeman for your personalized hair loss treatment options. Hims.com/Gleeman. Obviously, results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil.
Yep,
Prescription products
that's one of
require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information. Hims.com/Gleeman. And then our final sponsor of the day is Factor. And when John comes back
Oh,
from all his trips, one of the things he likes is to have some Factor meals waiting for him so he doesn't have to
yes.
cook.
Yeah.
We've both tried
Or
Factor
go
meals.
shopping. You know what I mean? That's the big thing. It's making it to the grocery store to do the shopping and stuff, or ordering food from out. Factor has just got these nice little meals prepackaged, sitting refrigerated in our refrigerator. So easy to make, so good, and so generally good for you.
Yes.
But
And you can also customize it if you're looking for, Calorie Smart or Protein Plus or various diets. If you want vegetarian, if you want for kids, they can usually have at least 35 different meals plus like 60 add-ons for each weekly menu, and the
yeah,
menu changes and you can pick what you want and what you don't.
And it's restaurant quality stuff. Like that butter chicken that they've got is so good.
Yes, and all you got
Yeah.
to do is just heat it up and go.
Yep.
Go to factormeals.com/Gleeman50 and use the code Gleeman50. And the reason it's the code Gleeman50 is you get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's the
That's
code Gleeman50 at factormeals.com/Gleeman50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. Okay, so another thing that I think, especially I guess when it comes to like, oh, this reliever's unavailable for a particular
right.
game,
Right.
when you hear that in May, Jack's pitched 2 in a row, he's going to be down for this game. I think the reaction people have is, all right, well, you're trying to kind of manage them for 162 games. You know that you can't use, like we just talked about with Alcala, you can't use the guy 3 out of every 4 games and expect
Sure.
him to hold up for 6 months from an injury standpoint, but also just from an effectiveness standpoint.
Sure.
But then you get to this point, and like we just talked about as we were recapping the 4 Cleveland games, there are points where it's like, well, Jax is unavailable today. He's down. They've made him down. And it's not because like he's injured. It's because they've decided the usage from the previous 2 or 3 days means that unless there's an emergency, we would really like to avoid using him.
Right.
That's not
In part because he just might not be as effective.
well, and that's kind of what I'm getting to is like I think in May it's a long-term view of we know, and I think most fans probably would recognize we can't use him up now because then we won't have him for August and September. Well, that's kind of that aspect of it is out the
Right.
window.
That's right. Yeah.
Because there's no holding him back. Like there's no, oh, we can't use him now because we need him for 2 months from now. Well, 2 months from now, you're going to be on your couch. Um, and, but I think that doesn't take away from the need to still limit guys' workload from an effectiveness standpoint. And I think Jax is a guy who can pitch a lot. I mean, he's going to be among the league leaders. He's going to be one of those Cleveland style workloads where he's going to pitch 70 games and 70 something innings, and they're all high leverage. I mean, that is a lot of stress for a reliever. And so when they say, well, he's down today because he pitched, 1 2/3 yesterday and he had to come in and warm up in a hurry and, finish the game the day before or, have that flipped. But you get the idea in the previous 2 days. It's not because they're saving him for some mythical point that may or may not ever arrive. It's literally just because they don't think he'll be particularly effective
Right.
on a third straight day, having pitched more than his usual workload or intensity the previous 2 days. And that's not a hard and fast thing. That's subjective. That varies by team. It varies by month. It varies by pitcher. And I think that goes to overall. I think you agree. You were saying something this to me when we weren't recording a minute ago, which is it's not like they're holding things back.
No, right. Yeah.
They rushed, not, I don't mean rushed I know people going, Correa missed 2 months. How's he rushed? Buxton missed them. But they're back before they were 100%. Now, maybe being 100% would have taken until next spring. And so there was no choice but to quote unquote rush them back.
Right.
But they brought back both Correa and Buxton before they were ready to be full-time players, before they knew they were fully healthy. Now, maybe that point just never would have come this season, so it wouldn't have mattered. That's kind of the conclusion they came to. So that's why they're getting days off. That's why one of them's the DH in a game or whatever. They've looked pretty good. And then also, it's not like they're leaving prospects at AAA here.
Right.
Everybody's up who they think is going to be up.
Right.
Look, you got Zebby in the rotation, you got Fest in the rotation,
Yep.
You got Woods Richardson in the rotation. If they had a reliever who was lighting it up at AAA, they'd be in the majors. Go look at who they've cycled through. They've used basically the whole Saints bullpen this year at various points.
Right.
And then, you still got Brooks Lee up.
Right.
If Emmanuel Rodriguez, Edward Julian is up. They got guys who were, supposed to be at AAA, if that. Some of them were supposed to be at AA right now. If Emmanuel Rodriguez were healthy, he would maybe be the one guy you could point to. Although even then you have Larnach and Wallner, and it's like, do you really need him as a corner outfielder?
Right.
He's not healthy, so he's not an option. There's nothing they've held back here. They just don't have enough, I think. Like it's not that they're saying, we're holding back these reliever usages or we're going to leave guys at AAA because it's not worth the future developmental stalling that will, be caused by calling them up. No, if they got a guy they think can help, they're putting
Right.
him in the lineup, they're putting him in the bullpen, they're putting him in the rotation, they're bringing Buxton Correa back as soon as they felt it was, reasonable to bring them back, rightly or wrongly. They don't have enough. It's
Yeah,
like,
that's right. Yeah. I mean, and if anything, it feels almost like this team is leaning too much into its. Uh, if you're going to, one of the questions I've been getting is sort of like, how different would this be if they would have had an extra $40 million to spend, right?
Right.
And I mean, that's impossible to say. Like specifically, who would they have acquired to have made this last month go away?
I can tell you one thing, it wouldn't have been worse.
Well, that's I mean that's
Couldn't
part
be
of it, right?
worse.
Well, and they might have had more cushion. They might have been fighting for the division a little bit earlier. They might have had a big a slow start. They might have had a veteran pitcher. But one of the things that sort of stuck out, or at least I think Rocco's even kind of talked about it, but it's also just been apparent. Uh, the veterans seem to be reacting better to this sort of slide than some of the newer players, some of the rookies and so on. The guys who have been around, it seems consistently like that's the guy who's been around, a few years, played in the majors a few years, even if it's somebody like Castro who, didn't really thrive for those first 3 years in Detroit, but he's been around for a while. Jeffers has been hitting. Correa's back up. Buxton has been doing something. You don't
Castro and
agree with
Jeffers
me.
have been terrible for
Well, Jeffers
3
is hitting
months.
400. Jeffers is hitting like 400 here in September.
Mm.
I
I mean, he
listen.
think of how good he
I'm
was in the beginning of the season.
no. I mean,
And think of where his final numbers
right.
are.
No, I agree with you.
He's had some good moments here, and Castro's had some good moments here over
That's
the
right.
last
But
couple
both
of
of them
weeks
have
too.
definitely been through some problems. But here within the last week or so, it feels like they're the ones who are
Ryan Jeffers is hitting 170 in September, John.
170 in September.
With 0 home runs. I don't know what you're on
I don't
there.
know who I was thinking of. Okay,
Castro's been terrible. I mean, almost everybody in the lineup's been terrible. I think you're right in the sense that like Pablo Lopez has been the one good
well, I mean,
starter
that's true too.
they've
Right?
had, and Griffin Jacks has been the one good reliever they've had, and you're seeing Correa and Buxton come back and contribute and all that, and Santana's had some good moments. He's
Well,
certainly
that's
the
true.
most,
Another veteran. Yep.
but I don't know. I mean, Kepler hadn't even played now.
Well, that's true.
He's their most veteran guy.
It's a fair, right? I guess.
You know, I agree that like Miranda, Lewis, Julian, Brooks Lee, those guys have all struggled, and those
Right.
are young guys, inexperienced guys. But the one
Wallner's the exception
Wallner's
to the
been
rule.
great.
Right. Yep. Agreed.
he's got 165 games career. The guy
Absolutely.
was at AAA 2 months ago or 3 months ago. So I don't know. It's hard to. I mean, first of all, a team doesn't go 10-20. A good team doesn't go 10-20 without a lot of contributors towards that 10-20. A lot of people, dragging it down. And we talked about ownership. We talked about the front office moves. We talked about Baldelli. We can talk about, some of the, as small
Sure.
as Tommy Watkins waving in some guys
Well-
to get thrown out at the plate. And you can go up and down the rotation. You can go up and down the bullpen. You can go up and down the lineup. Like, I joke, like multiple things can be true. Everything can be true in this spot. Like there are so few guys who have been healthy and contributed consistent above average performances, even not just all 6 months, but like for even most of that 6 months, that, Castro got hot for 6 weeks and we were like, oh, I mean, not Castro, Vasquez, excuse me,
Right.
got hot for 6 weeks and we were like, oh, well, he's going to start well, he's been terrible now for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Castro was arguably their MVP in the first half, made the All-Star team. He's going to finish maybe with an OPS plus below 100. His people are going to look back at that All-Star appearance and go, what the hell happened there?
Yeah, exactly.
And, Miranda has not hit for power basically for
Basically,
2
since he
months.
went 14 for 14.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And the biggest disappointment offensively has been Royce Lewis.
Lewis, yep.
He was so magical for them. Every time he would come back from an injury for 3 years, every time he would be in the lineup, he was their best hitter. Clutch moments, RBIs, grand slams, big spots in the playoffs. He comes back from the latest injury. He had a little success right away because he always does. But he's now, for, 6 weeks, he's hitting, 205 with 1 homer, I think. A whole bunch of strikeouts. He's swinging at everything now all of a sudden.
Right.
He's not drawing any walks anymore.
Yep.
And, Brooks Lee hasn't contributed much. I'm not going to put a ton of blame on a rookie, obviously, but he's really been.
He's had 10 RBI this month, but yes, agreed. He hasn't been
Well,
doing a ton as
one
well, right?
came in a 90-minute span there.
Well,
but
exactly
yes.
right. 5 of them came in 90 minutes.
Yeah, half.
Yeah,
I
that's
would
right.
say.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Julian hasn't provided anything in this second round. It looked for a minute that maybe he's playing better, but he struggled defensively. He's kind of now been shoved aside offensively too, because now it frees up Farmer and Lee to play second base because Correa's back playing shortstop. So the pitching, if you're looking at on field, what's, I guess, quote unquote, to blame here, it's the bullpen, in my opinion. It's then also the starting rotation being filled by guys who are just trying to get through 4 or 5 innings. That's not their fault, though. I mean, it's not Zebby Matthews' fault that he's not a good 6-inning starter in the majors 3 months after being at single A.
Sure, of course.
It's, if anything, it's the Twins' fault for requiring him to be in the rotation at this point. But then you can look at the lineup too, and it's funny, like, if the lineup had been this bad over the last month plus, and the pitching was like even average, first of all, they're probably in the playoffs right now. Maybe. Or they're, on the verge of locking in the playoff spot, and everyone's ripping the lineup.
Yeah, right. Yep.
The flip side is also true. If the pitching had been this bad, but the lineup was clicking like it did at midseason, where they were scoring 5, 6, 7 runs pretty consistently, well, they wouldn't be in all these 1-run games where, Ronnie Henriquez giving up a couple of runs is the difference between a win and a loss. It's the combination of both that has really not only dragged down all elements of the team, but it almost like magnifies each other. Like, the lineup struggling keeps them from ever having enough breathing room to have kind of a medium or low leverage experience in the late innings of the bullpen, which then requires using Jax and Sands and Duran over and over and over again. And it also means any mistake that the bullpen makes becomes a loss instead of just, they were up 3 and now they're only up 1.
One of the things that, often happens when you get a late season collapse like this is changes are made.
Yeah.
Right. And one of what you're describing,
total system failure.
Total system failure. It's hard to figure out where those changes are going to be made, right? Like, you're not necessarily like, we've got to overhaul the lineup. We've got to overhaul the starting rotation. I think the bullpen is probably the obvious place, but changes are often made beyond the players with something like this. I don't think Rocco's been doing a bad job, and I think Rocco would be still viewed as a very good manager, despite this by most of the league. He might be picked up by somebody. Falvey and Levine, I don't think those guys are going to be, in jeopardy of their job. If anything, we're more concerned about Falvey leaving to go someplace else because we're not sure whether or not he's under contract for the upcoming year. Right? We still haven't heard about that. The one area that where you'd be like, well, the one that we absolutely need to make a change is ownership. But that's the one that you can't change.
Right? Well, yeah, I mean, it's the flip side of what we talked about in the middle of the show, the kind of trickle down effect where it starts with ownership cutting the payroll, then it goes to the front office, has their hands tied, but with their hands tied, they go 0 for 6 adding pitchers. Then it gets to Baldelli, who, because they went 0 for 6 adding pitchers with a lowered payroll, he just doesn't have any people he can trust, and then it leads to the bullpen struggling. Well, now you're basically just flipping it.
Right.
And you're starting from the bottom and going to the top, and you're saying, like, well, you can't fire all the players. You can change the players, certainly.
Right. And some of them are. On an individual basis, you're going to find some changes.
But, you start from the top or start from the bottom and go up now this time. The reverse of what we did before. You start with the players. Well, they need to make some changes in the offseason, obviously. But that was true last offseason, and, they didn't have the resources to do it. So you go up one level and you get the Baldelli. And I'm certain that there are many people listening to this who want him fired. I mean, that's always the case with a manager. Anytime a team struggles, hell, when they were winning, people wanted him fired. That's just the way it is. That's fandom.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, am I saying he's done a great job? I don't think he's done a particularly great job this season. I think there have been more questionable decision making than typical for him. But I also think he's been put into a situation where he has no safe buttons to push, and so anybody's going to look bad in that circumstance. So if you're talking about firing him, well, can't he just point up at the front office one level up?
That's right.
And say, look what they gave me or what they didn't give me.
Right.
They gave me 0 pitching help.
Yeah.
We lost Sonny Gray.
Yeah, it's not like he wasn't a week before the trade deadline begging for some pitching help at the trade deadline.
Begging.
Right.
Correa gave them a list of guys to go try to
Right.
get.
Right.
They were
Right.
all begging, and they all put on a good front afterward publicly
Right. Yeah.
and said, "Hey, we got the talent in this room to win. We can do it. We got all we need. You know, but believe me, they were disappointed. Fans were disappointed. I think Falvey was disappointed
Of
that
course.
he couldn't pull off a trade. But ultimately, you either do or you don't.
Right.
There is no try. Is that the
Yeah, that's
Yoda?
Yoda. Yeah.
Yeah. We're very similar, Yoda and I.
Yes.
Similar posture.
Yeah.
As John is
Yes.
looking right now. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But so if you want to fire Baldelli, not you, but like the royal you,
Right.
if you want to fire Baldelli, Baldelli can point one level up and say, look at what they gave me to
Right.
work with. What
Right.
are my bullpen options?
You want
I
to?
got
You want
three
you,
rookies in the rotation. I got
you want to know why I'm pulling the guys out of the
Right.
start pretty early? Look at who's in the starting spots here. Right.
okay.
Yeah.
So then go one level up and you go, well, they gotta blow out the front office. They got some heads got to roll. They got to make changes or something. Okay, I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong or whatever. That's certainly a common fan reaction. Like I said, well, they can also point one level up and go,
Yep.
we had to cut 30 million in payroll. What kind of bullpen pieces and starting pitching do you think I was going to add?
Right.
I had to cut 30 million. Those guys were like, what do you think I was going to go sign? I had 9 million to fill 5 pitching staff spots.
Right.
What the
And that
hell
was
do you
after
think?
trading away Polanco. I had to
Right.
trade away. I had to trade away money to get
Right.
money. Right.
Okay, they point one level up, and here's the problem. That's the top level,
They're the ones who get to choose who to fire.
right? That's the problem.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
I mean,
yeah.
all this is subjective on these other levels, but you point to the top level and you say,
Yeah.
well, who are you blaming? And by the way, they will try to blame people, but I ain't hearing that BS. But
right. Yeah.
you guys slashed 30 something million off of a payroll that was not an exorbitant payroll to begin with.
Right.
At a time when the fan morale was at its highest in 20 years, I would argue. Target Field was rocking in October. They
Right.
experienced some level of success for the first time in a generation, basically. You had the good core of a team. You had playoff revenue. You had an uncertain situation with the television, which obviously hurt them. But they expected more attendance. They expected a lot of things from a revenue standpoint that have not come to fruition. And I'm sure they will blame that. Do you know why your attendance was down coming off a division-winning,
I was about to
playoff-winning
say.
season?
Yeah. Yep.
Because in November, every fan was told they're going to crap on you.
Right.
Every fan was told, remember how much fun you were having last month and how optimistic and enthusiastic you were about this team on the rise that was finally winning in the playoffs, had finally broken the 0 for 18, finally got that monkey off their back. A new era of young fans at least got to experience wins in October in Target Field. We're going to cut 20 something percent off the payroll. And we're going to make it so that basically the front office can't do anything they want to do. And then
And then keep
we're not going
going.
to let you watch the damn thing on television.
There we go. Yep. And we're going to do that,
no
but
crap.
we're going to make sure that you can't watch it, but pocket the money, the millions, the
Yeah.
tens of millions of dollars that we
then,
got for you not watching it.
By the way, that manager and that team are going to be 70 and 53, 2/3 of the way through the season.
Right.
They're going to be in prime playoff position on July 30th when the trade deadline rolls around. We're not going to approve any money being added, any significant money.
Right.
You want to add 700,000 in Trevor Richards? Yeah, go for it. But you cannot add anybody decent without requiring that selling team to eat money, which then requires more prospect capital, which then, by the way, you start to hear stuff from the front office, which is like, well, they were asking for Luke Keeschel for Eric.
Right.
Yeah, because you guys were making them eat $5 million because the payroll situation. And so we're not going to do a damn thing at the trade deadline. And then this team is going to fulfill every possible fear that the fan base had based on the payroll cuts and the inactive offseason and the lack of impact moves and
while they're still going to end up with mid-80s in the win, end up above 500 and stuff, they're going to be 1 or 2 games short of the postseason,
which is precisely the type of depth that would have been added.
That's right.
With 30 million extra or even 15 million extra in payroll, instead of having
5 million at the trade deadline.
Right, exactly. And so,
right.
Well, no wonder your payroll, the attendance is down slightly instead of being up. They thought
Right.
it was going to be
Oh,
up
by the way, you're
300,000.
by the way, you're also in a market now where the Wolves look good, the Wild look good, the I won't say the Gophers,
Links
the
look good.
Vikings look good, the Lynx look good. Like, yeah, you're also, by the way, in a competitive sports market where we can pay attention to a lot of stuff. A lot, and you're falling further and further down the line. Yeah,
And
that's what.
unfortunately, the reality, and we can end on this very high note. Uh, the reality is, I think fans would like to think that if this team falls just short, that the Poleads cannot help but realize, oh, cutting 30 million off the payroll actually did keep this team from making the playoffs. I think anybody, Stevie Wonder could see that, obviously. And hopefully they will see that they were projecting 2.3 million fans, and they're going to be lucky to get above 1.9 million fans, which is below last season slightly. Instead of, there's
Right.
no reason for a team to have lower payroll
That is
the year
crazy.
after they win the division and win the
Right.
playoff series. Well,
Lower
what is,
attendance. Right.
yeah, excuse me.
Right. Yeah.
Wow,
Right.
I spoke too soon on that.
All of the
Uh,
above. Right. Yeah.
Lower attendance. Well, the reason is you you took that morale and you just stomped on it before
Right.
the offseason even began. And then every move they did or didn't make during the offseason further stomped on it. And then people got to the point and they were like, why am I buying tickets to this thing? If they don't care, why do I care? And so,
Right.
and now you've had every fear play out. But here's the problem. Ultimately, the buck stops with you can't point any higher than the ownership suite. I know everyone would love to think that the way the world works is ownership will realize the mistake they made and realize that they were penny wise and pound foolish and realize that they did cost this team dearly, 2 or 3 wins, which would have made all the difference. And they did do a horrendous job of messaging and PR towards the fan base to cause the attendance to sink. And then you toss in the television situation. You would hope that a group of human beings, even billionaires, would experience all that and say, we screwed this up. Let's try to make up for it next season. Let's get that payroll back to the mid level instead of the bottom third. Let's try to do some fan outreach. Let's try to really focus not on money, but on distribution on the television side and on and on and on and on. And if that happens, I'll throw a parade. It will completely alter my entire
Or
feeling
you throw
on
yourself down a flight of stairs.
sure. It's not like I could be any more injured. What's the difference? Maybe that'd be good for my back. Like in the cartoons, a guy would get hit in the head and he'd be
Sure.
smart all of a sudden.
Yeah, right, right. That's
Maybe
right.
I throw myself down a flight of stairs, my back fixes itself. But you would love to believe that billionaires would have that mindset. But man, I don't think that's what's going to happen. And I think not only isn't that going to happen, I suspect with undershooting their projected attendance by 300,000, which with a television situation that is certainly no better than it
And
was, and I would argue
potentially
marginally worse,
Right.
with potentially no playoff revenue. That's their own doing, but it's still true. No playoff revenue, which is, not $50 million, but it could be $5 to $10 million minimally, playoff revenue. All those things, and then it then bleeds into next season with season ticket renewals and sponsorships and all that stuff because the team is on the downswing in that case. Well, that's certainly going to lead to significantly less revenue, not only from the year before, but from their projected numbers for this year.
Yep.
Well, less revenue is going to lead to lower payroll.
Yeah, that's it.
And then this is just going to be a never-ending cycle of BS that was started by, unfortunately, the people who make the decisions and for whom you cannot fire.
Yeah, that's right.
Cannot
In the
fire
same
the
way things
billionaire owner.
in the same way things snowballed on this team from and at beginning of August down through end of September here, we're leaving the possibility that things snowball on this organization
Yeah.
as they start playing worse and revenue declines, they end up losing payroll and they see interest
Yes. And then they go
continue to
next,
fail.
in November, they'll go, well, yeah, we just got to right size this payroll again. I mean, we
That's right.
lost
That's right. Look at what
X
happened.
number
Look
of
what happened.
dollars and
Right.
attendance, and hey, we can't be 22nd in payroll anymore. We got to be 26th in payroll. But hey, we can win. You look, Cleveland won with a lower payroll. We can surely do it, and blah 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 blah. And but here's the one saving grace: winning fixes everything. I'm not going to quote Al Davis or anything, but you know, if this team can pull their head out of their butts for this final 9 game
Yeah.
stretch and go 5-4
Right.
even,
Yeah. Well,
they can not only reverse this downward spiral at the last minute, they can not only stumble back their way, moonwalk, whatever, into the playoffs, but once you're there, anything can happen. And I know people are like, well, no, a team that stumbles like this, they can't go win 2 out of 3 on the road in Houston or whatever, and ends up being, well, Rangers fans thought that last year at
that's
this
right,
time.
Tim. Exactly.
Diamondbacks fans that you don't know. Even a struggling team, an above 500 team can win 2 out of 3 games against another good team all the time. It happens dozens of times every year to every team. And so all this negative momentum and these struggles can just be not fixed, but they can be halted and reversed somewhat by just going 5-4 or 6-3 over a 9 game stretch in which you're playing 6 out of the 9 games at home, including a 3 game series against the worst team in the National League that just gave up 25 runs to the Shohei Ohtani and the Dodgers yesterday. That's all it takes right now to not undo all the bad things that have happened. It's not going to change the way fans are thinking about ownership, and it's not going to change, what they think about Baldelli or the front office or everything. But it can at least halt this negative momentum. You can at least say we got to the same promised land, the same
Yep.
goal at the end of the season. Now we wanted to be the 2 seed instead of the 6 seed, and it's a much more difficult path. But it doesn't require a whole lot to go 5-4 down the stretch with
Yeah.
6 of the 9 games at home.
We'll see.
That's all it takes to at least halt this thing. And if they don't do that, and I'd say it's a coin flip, honestly, at this point, I don't feel strongly one way or the other. I certainly feel strongly that if it were equal, Detroit has the advantage right now because they've been playing so well. The
Sure.
Twins have been playing so poorly, and Detroit finishes with 3 games that they could very easily just sweep, without much effort against the White Sox. However, the tiebreaker does matter. The Twins can be tied with them and win. And so that's huge with 9 games left because there are a lot of scenarios where you are tied. If you go 5-4 and they go 5-4, you win, you advance. They do not. And so that is the one saving grace they have. Now that can vanish tonight, basically.
Exactly right.
If they lose and the Tigers win, then you're a game back and the tiebreaker certainly doesn't matter as much. And so as negative as things may seem and as negative as this podcast has obviously been, it would be hard not to be negative watching what we've watched of this team over the last week, month, whatever. You can halt all that. You can at least put on pause that criticism and lighten some of it a little bit by just getting your act together and just finding your way to stumble across the last mile of this marathon just standing. And so that's where they're at.
And we'll be back on Monday to see if we can take 2 out of 3 from the Red Sox. We'll be back with another free episode on Friday to see if they can get 4 or 5 out of these next 6 games, kind of set themselves up for a weekend worth watching. We will continue to come to you free thanks to our sponsors. Those sponsors today included Factor and Hims and Game Time and Soda Stick and Brixworth, and best of all, our presenting sponsor, which is Black Stack Brewing. We'd like to give a special thanks to them. They're now being distributed to all of Greater Minnesota. Stop by your favorite liquor store on the Black Stack Tap Room to grab your favorite brew or try something new. You're going to want to have those beers over these next 9 games. You're going to want to have them ready to go, either as celebratory or as commiserating, pain relief.
We need some sponsors with some harder stuff, I think is what we need.
Blackstack now in the business of brewing heroin.
Well, okay. That's at Twins Geek. You want to say that? All right. We'll talk to the lovely Patreon subscribers among you bright and early Monday morning, and the rest of y'all, we'll see you Friday.
Gleeman